Today I'm going to talk about World War II propaganda and goals that some of the leaders had if they were to win the war. So in Britain, there was efforts and sacrifices made to save everything that could be used in the war effort, such as food, rubber, metal, clothing. And along with that, in terms of propaganda for fighting, it was a volunteer sort of sentiment, volunteering to fight against the Axis powers and to defend the homeland. An example of this would be the right hand picture that says, "You're Britain, fight for it now." This picture was used to accentuate the beauty of Britain and enhance people's desire to defend the homeland. And along with World War II, there was new opportunities, specifically for women to be in non-combatant positions in the army, as well as new women organizations such as the Women's Land Army, which became a structured group with production goals and systems to keep food available for the home front and the war effort. British goals during World War II, or if they were to win, was they wanted a complete defeat, a complete unconditional surrender of all Axis powers. This goal would then be used to form the occupation that divided Germany post-war until 1989. And along with this, one of Churchill's goals was that every single country that was um, conquered by by Germany and the Axis powers, would have their independence restored. And when the full Allied powers were created, um, these there was promotions to negotiate self-determined governments. Stalin agrees to this, but never intends to allow it, especially in Poland. Um, so Churchill also was an imperialist, and he wanted every single British holding before the war to remain so, especially India. And then Churchill had a desire to create a Jewish state in the Middle East, um, that would be used for refugees of World War II. And that was some of his main goals. So Soviet propaganda. On the Eastern Front, Hitler was fighting an ideology of annihilation. He believed that Russians were inferior and needed to be killed. Because of this sentiment, the atrocities on the Eastern Front happened at a much more rapid and massive clip than on the Western Front. A few examples of these atrocities would be the thousands of Soviet POWs who would later starve in German war camps, as well as the Holocaust by the bullets. These atrocities created a certain type of propaganda on the Russian home front. Stalin changed his propaganda ideology quickly when he realized that the best way to galvanize Russian citizens was by appealing to the defense of the fatherland, rather than a defense of communist ideology. This is exemplified when the slogan on the masthead of the Pravda changed from "Proletarians of all lands unite" to "Death to the German occupiers." At the point when the war started, Stalin was no longer concerned about his hold over his country or his Communist Party. And so because of this, he appealed to his citizens' patriotism and their common cause exemplified, for example, in his radio speech in July of 1941, when he addressed the Russian people as his brothers and sisters. While not actually born in Russia, Stalin knew that this tactic of propaganda would be highly effective in getting his citizens and, more importantly, his soldiers to obey his commands and believe they could win the war. More than anything, the Russian state wanted their citizens to believe that this was a people's war, a just defense of the motherland. To help Russian soldiers believe in their cause, newspapers would detail the atrocities that was happening in German occupied territory and tell the public that those atrocities are what will happen to each Russian citizen if they do not win the fight. This helped the Russian military to stand their ground when the Germans were on the Stalingrad offensive. Before Russia found themselves in the middle of World War II and in conflict with Germany, it is quite apparent that they wanted to distance themselves from the conflict. That being said, they did have ambitions. Stalin wanted to expand territory. This is apparent not only from his documents and actions after the war, but also before the war with Germany. He wanted to annex Estonia, Latvia, and all of Lithuania. Before the war, he was to pay Germany a sum relative to what the United States paid for Alaska. The three Baltic states is just an example of some of the land Stalin wanted to annex into Russian territory. Other land included Greece, Turkey, Iran, and Japan. While Stalin wanted to annex territory, He also wanted to set up independent communist states or dependent on the Soviet Union. Territory for Poland was confusing, and negotiations between the Allied countries was complex. Stalin's most important vision for Poland was the domestic situation. Stalin wanted to set up a new communist party that would become the government in Poland. While Poland wasn't to become Soviet territory, the Polish government was to be loyal to Stalin. This would help expand communist ideology, empower the Russian state, and help to ensure the Russians' protection from Germany. Other such areas that he wanted to make communist was Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Albania, and East Germany. In terms of Russia's allies, Stalin did not expect the close alliance with Britain and the United States to last. One of these reasons was Stalin's perceived ideology that a communist state would inevitably come in conflict with capitalist countries. So, propaganda was a very powerful tool for each country that used it during World War II. The United States was no exception to this, as it helped unite the public and the military in the fight to win the war. Propaganda came in many forms, such as posters, comic books, radio broadcasts, movies, magazines, leaflets, and newspapers. The most popular types of American propaganda were those asking for people to assist in the war effort. That could be anything from getting a factory job to enlisting in the armed forces, buying war bonds, or conserving goods. Posters were also used to promote loyalty to war efforts and commitment to victory. Propagandists encouraged hatred toward the enemy and support for American allies. Posters were produced asking Americans to try and conserve products such as fats, butter, coffee, and rubber. Conservation was the largest theme among posters produced during the war, as 1 in 7 posters carries this theme. Propaganda had an important impact on American women during World War II, as it persuaded women to do their part in the workplace. Women worked in a variety of positions previously closed to them. However, they played a huge role in the aviation and munitions industry. The U.S. government's Rosie the Riveter propaganda campaign was based in a small part on real-life munitions workers. Primarily a fictitious character, the song Bandana-Clad Rosie became one of the most successful recruitment tools in American history and the most iconic image of working women during World War II. So, propaganda in Japan. Japanese people both admired and feared Western powers. Japanese propaganda against Americans portrayed Westerners as demons. Japanese used propaganda to dehumanize their enemies. Japanese soldiers and citizens were expected to portray the following characteristics: loyalty, piety, death as a selfless thing, greater good for the whole, which is basically Japanese fascism. The war became an act of purification for many. All honor should go to the emperor, who they thought was divine. The National Spiritual Mobilization Campaign was launched by the Japanese government in 1937 and would continue in various forms throughout the end of the war. This campaign was primarily concerned with bringing the many independent patriotic organizations already in existence in Japan under a single umbrella, providing guidance for the management of thought and propaganda. The spiritual mobilization campaign impacted patriotism, the education of Japanese children and youth, and the various wartime organizations which existed at the time. Just so you know, the postcard above says, "Always be prepared to serve our homeland." Production of consumer goods became almost non-existent in Japan, so that all industries would focus on wartime production. The Japanese government introduced a system of stringent rationing that is additional to food included clothing, nails, needles, bandages, shoes, cooking oil, tire tubes, and many other items. The Japanese people suffered during this time as it was difficult to come by necessary everyday items. So I want to talk about Germany propaganda now. Germany from the beginning centered on the ideal that Germany was not only wronged in the First World War, but also that Germany's struggles was one of destiny. Propaganda in Germany was everywhere as a state-sponsored machine, fueled by the Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels. Goebbels attempted not only to create a national community through movement of unity, but also presented Nazi symbolism and ideas at every occasion possible, from government buildings to festivals and making Nazi anniversaries legal holidays. Goebbels wanted to work to ensure that the German entertainment industry, such as radio and theater, promoted the German ideal, as well as depicting the war in a positive light. The goal, according to Joseph Goebbels, was to influence all sectors of public life. Obviously, Jewish artists were excluded from the membership needed to be part of the Nazi public sphere, meaning Jews, as well as communists, Democrats, or any other subversive group, was not allowed access to movies, music, literature, newspaper, or even retail. Joseph Goebbels, one of Hitler's closest associates, was the well-educated orator and propaganda chief spanning from the time of Hitler's rise to his death. Goebbels was arguably one of the most anti-Semitic members of Hitler's bureaucratic cabinet, who managed to not only control nearly every aspect of the public's lives, but also gave specific speeches with Hitler's similar tenacity. In 1942, the Reich Chamber of the Press controlled 80% of the nearly 1,000 newspapers within Germany. Loudspeakers projected messages to the people open on the streets, and the radio chamber created an affordable radio for all the homes of all German people. Books by Jewish writers, or even Aryan pacifists and liberals, were burned and destroyed. Bookstores and libraries purged. In the movies, all Jewish work and anything criticizing the social order were banned. Art observers were commissioned by Goebbels to praise all new German works, and that was the only thing they could do. Most of the films before Hitler's ascension were banned. Hitler's intentions in the beginning focused on Germany's political and military domination of Europe, with also parts of Asia and Africa. Hitler envisioned an empire of the entirety of Europe, envisioning the defeat of both Great Britain and the Soviet Union, with only their fates up for judgment. Great Britain likely would see some type of satellite rule, while the Soviet Union would be nearly entirely destroyed and dismantled. Colonial lands in Africa would possibly supplement the agricultural requirements for the new Reich. Yet Hitler explicitly stated that the lands of the East were going to be the direct areas of Germanic resettlement. German lands within the German Reich was going to see some changes after the wars of domination were over. Berlin would be renamed Germania. German lands would be cleansed and purged of nearly all societal undesirables, which ranged from total annihilation to systematic sterilization. With the massive loss of male life evident to Hitler in 1943, he envisioned a birthing stimulus plan, allowing members of the SS to take multiple wives in an attempt to boost German populations. This included efforts to settle ethnic Germans in the land of Poland and Russia as part of greater effort to boost the population and increase agricultural output. German urban centers would see a process of de-Christianization, renovation, and the creation of magnificent works of infrastructure and commemoration. Here's our works cited.